All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to FileMaker for Stage Lighting, lesson number 1. I guess, your host, Mike Wood, your instructor, Mike Wood. Welcome back to my channel. It's been a couple months since we've done some live streams, so I'm excited to jump back in and get started here. A couple quick housekeeping things. This is the first of a series of these videos I'm going to be doing. I'm going to do 4 of them this week and then kind of see where it goes from there. The purposes of the sessions this week will be to build a basic work notes database from the ground up. So we're going to have some work notes, we're going to have our instrument records, and then we're going to link those things together to have a workable database that you can use on your shows whenever we get to finally do shows again. So the software I'm using is FileMaker. If you don't already have the demo of FileMaker, head over to my website, mikewoodld.com/FileMaker, and there are some links there that you can download a free 45-day demo. It'll be super helpful if you follow along live. I'm going to be using FileMaker 19 for all of the stuff I show you, but I don't think, I know at least this week, anything that I'm doing does not have anything specific to 19. So if you're using an older version, you should be just fine. If there is any kind of feature that I bring up at any point during these that is specific to 19 that will not work on earlier ones, I will be sure to let you know. Other final thing before we get started, I'm not going to do any video tonight. You're just going to hear audio, and obviously you'll see the demo on the screen. Hopefully everything stays in sync. We've been having some sync issues in the past. So if there's any issues or anything that come up with audio, anything like that, throw them into the chat. And we will do questions at the end. I'm going to try to keep this under an hour each night with some time for questions at the end. So if there's anything very urgent that you have as it's going through, throw it in the chat. Otherwise, I'll get to stuff towards the end of the session. Okay, so again, this week we're going to be creating a simple work note application that connects work notes with individual instrument records from Lightright. Tonight, it's just going to be a very introductory level overview of those things. It's going to be a very simple data structure, very simple relationships. Then in the future, after we get through this week, we're going to take the file that we make together this week and expand that to have other features. We'll make it a little bit more feature rich with work notes. We might add some programming notes. We could add some lighting rig paperwork. Really, I'm going to do some surveys to see where people want to take it. So tonight we're going to start out with planning our data structure. We're going to walk you through how to create a new file. We're going to create the tables and create the fields we need in that file. We'll create relationships between our two tables. We'll do some very basic formatting on the layout. We'll talk about value lists, and we'll talk about portals. Seems like a lot of information, but it'll actually go relatively quickly. So the first thing to think about when we're starting to plan out our database is what information are we going to be putting into this database. So for our purposes today, it's pretty simple. We need 2 tables, one that holds all of our instrument records, all of our instrument information, and another one that holds all of our work note records. So when I say tables, tables are part of that database structure. So database is kind of our overall overarching container that we're putting everything into. So within that database, we can have multiple tables, and those tables can have multiple records in them. The records have fields associated with them. And if you're not familiar with database design and you're maybe coming from a spreadsheet world, here's an example of a spreadsheet, right? Each row of this spreadsheet can be thought of as a record in this table. Think of the actual sheet itself as the table. And then the fields, of course, are our column headers here. So for every record has a timestamp, has who they voted for. This happens to be a screen grab from the previous contest, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of the hierarchy of how this data is organized. Database has tables. Tables contain records. So now we need to think about what fields we might need to contain in our 2 tables. So let's talk about instruments to begin with. I think the most obvious thing we can look at is Lightright. Any information that might be useful about our instruments is going to go into this instrument records table. We want to have individual fields for each one of these items: purpose, channel, dimmer, address, etc., etc. The work notes one might have more information involved. Note IDs, what kind of note it is, who the note is from, who the note is for, etc., etc. And actually, I forgot on this list, what is the note about? Like, what's the target of this note? For our particular example today, we're going to be talking about work notes that only can contain a note for one instrument. So I'm going to get back to that in a second. Excuse me for a second. Sorry, my door just opened and I got confused. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is work notes that are associated with one channel. So obviously in the real world, you might have a work note that's for 3 different channels at once. For the purposes of our simple project, we would need to make 3 separate work notes for that. Next week or the week after, whenever we do the next session of this, we'll get into a little bit more how you can create more complex relationships in order to link multiple records to things. But again, for tonight, we're just going to keep it pretty simple. So the thing that those two tables will have in common, we're going to use the channel number for that. So that'll be our common key between those 2 different tables. Every instrument is going to have a channel number associated with it, and in order to create a work note, we're going to have to put a channel number in that is associated to that work note. So that's called a one-to-many relationship. So again, there's all kinds of cool tutorials out there you can do on how relational database design works. I'm not going to go super in-depth into it this evening, but this is a good representation of what I'm talking about when I say that. So for example, instruments, we might have channel 3. Channel 3 can be assigned to multiple notes, but a note can only contain one channel, or can only contain channel 3, or can only contain whatever individual channel that is. Okay, enough talking. Let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So again, I'm using FileMaker 19 for everything I'm doing. I've opened FileMaker up here. This is the launcher window, and I've gone to File, Create New. When I do that, I'm going to create a blank document. I would encourage you, if you're thinking about creating a solution for the first time, and you know something maybe other than work notes, other than what we're doing, take a look at some of these starter things. You could actually adapt these things pretty quickly to work for things in our industry. Inventory, obviously, tasks. You could probably use this actually to start your own work notes database if you wanted to. But we're going to start out with a blank one. So I'm going to choose blank and create, and I'm going to give it a name. So this is going to be lesson 1. Okay, so right away, what happens is we have 2 windows that have popped up here. We have an empty layout that's got nothing on it behind it, and we see here in our Manage Database window that FileMaker has automatically created a table for us with the name of the file, so lesson 1, and it's automatically created a couple of fields. Now, for the purposes of this class, I'm going to delete these fields because we're going to remake some of them kind of in the way we want to. So let's go ahead, if you're following along, and delete all of the fields that currently exist in that table. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and rename my table by clicking on the Table tab here. If you accidentally close this window, by the way, you can get there by going File, Manage Database, or Command-Shift-D on a Mac. It's probably Control-Shift-D on Windows. So I'm going to change the name of this first table here to be Instrument Records. I'm actually just going to call it Instruments because I'm going to keep it as one word. Change. And now I'm going to create another one that's going to be called Work Notes. Great. Now, if you notice something right away here, FileMaker has gone ahead and put those 5 default fields into my Work Notes table when I created it. And that's fine. These are actually super helpful. And as you start to get a little bit more deeper into this, you'll see that really we can leave them. But just for the simplicity's sake of these lessons, we're going to delete them so you can kind of see step by step what we want to do. Okay, so again, now we have 2 tables, we have instruments and we have work notes, and now we want to go ahead and start adding fields to those tables. So I'm going to start out in my instruments table here, and I'm going to open up Lightright. I have this open in Lightright so that we can kind of get an idea of some of the potential names for fields that we would want in our database, or excuse me, in our table. You could, if you wanted to, have every single one of these Lightright fields in here. I'm not going to do all of them for the purposes of our demo. I'm going to do the ones that I think most people use the most often and the ones that I know I use the most often. So we'll start with purpose, channel, dimmer, address. Now, one thing that it's important to keep in mind here, later in the week, we are going to be doing some exports from Lightright to get our information into this program that we're making. It makes it easier down the road if our field names in our instrument table match exactly what the permanent names of Lightright are. So to say that a different way, you basically just want to match anything that's a Lightright field. So for example, unit number, I want to match the formatting of that exactly. So it's unit with the # with no space in between. Unit number, instrument type. Color gobo, we'll say focus. What am I missing here? I've got address. We'll do universe as well. DMX number and focus status. Okay, so again, you can add as many of those things in as you want. You can put all your user fields in. Really, it's up to you and how you work with your workflow. If you're trying to make something for other people to use, it might behoove you to add all of these, and then later on we can hide the things on different layouts that we don't want. But I find that, I mean, most people that are doing this are probably making solutions just for themselves and their teams. So if you never use all these user fields, don't add them to your database. It's just going to be more complication later on. The other thing that does not show up here in Lightwrite that we want to add is going to be a field called Lightwrite ID. Now, the Lightwrite ID is a unique identifier that Lightwrite creates for every single instrument that you add to your Lightwrite show file. This is going to become super, super handy later on down the road when we're importing that information, but more so when we're updating that information. So let's say you do your first, you go through your first tech and then we've added 3 lights. Now, if we've added lights, we've modified lights, we can use that Lightwrite ID as a field to find existing records and update them, and if none exist, to create new ones. Okay, so those are all the fields we need. I'm going to organize them by alphabetical by clicking on the field name header. Now, one thing you might have noticed as we did this is I didn't specify a type as I went through. And that's just a personal preference, just because I find it faster to go back and change those things after the fact. But you can 100% change the types of these fields as you're making them. And so we're going to do that right now. So address is always going to be a number. So I'm going to change that over to number. Channel, for our purposes, is always going to be a number, so I'm going to change that one. Same as dimmer. DMX number will be a number. And that might be just about it. Unit number. Well, unit number will not always be a number, because sometimes when you have multi-circuit things, but because we typically want to organize the contents of that by number, I'm going to go ahead, or excuse me, if we make a list, like a position list in unit order, we want to organize it by number. So I'm going to make the unit number field a number field. Oh, and I forgot circuit, obviously. We have name, certain. I've made the mistake before of accidentally canceling something and forgetting that it would then go ahead and wipe out just about everything that I've already entered. So I'm not going to make that mistake here. You can also add options, or you can add comments. You can do all kinds of stuff like that here. We can get into that in a later session. Okay, so now for work notes, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to add some fields. And what fields did we say we needed? We know that we need, where did it go? There it is. We know that we're going to need a note ID. We know we're going to need a type, status, a from, an assigned to, priority, contents, target ID. That target ID will be our channel number in this case. And then another thing I'll show you real quick is a container type. So sometimes it can become useful to drop a photo into your work note. So let's say, like, you're giving a focus note for the next day. Maybe you could just drop a photo in. You could, drop a picture of the light that moved or something like that. So I'm just going to add a photo field, and the type for that is going to be a container. Container fields in FileMaker are really cool. You can drop pretty much any kind of media or any kind of binary file. You can drop PDFs, movies, pictures, music, anything like that. You can drop into a container field. Status, target ID. Now in our case, again, target ID is going to be channel, so I'm going to change it to be a number. Now, one cool thing that FileMaker can do is our node ID right here. We always want these to be unique, and we don't always necessarily, in the heat of the moment in tech, want to spend time, adding node IDs and trying to track those IDs. So we're able to tell FileMaker to automatically insert a serial number into our node ID field. So to do that, I can either click on it and click options, or I can just double click on it. And there's some auto enter features here. So on auto enter, it's basically saying anytime that we create a new record, I want to add this to that record, or to that field on that record. So I'm going to generate a serial number, and I'm going to make sure under validation that it is unique. So it'll always be a unique number starting at 1. And you can see here under options now, auto interserial unique is enabled. Now, one thing that I should also turn off on this is prohibit modification of value. So what this basically means is once it's created, I can't manually go in and change that number, which is going to be important later on, especially as I start to look up different records and look up different things based on that number. I don't want to accidentally have two of the same work note IDs. We want those to always be unique. Okay. Good. So now the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and define our relationships between these two fields. So a relationship in this particular case is going to be the two things that these two tables have in common. And we've already established that that's going to be our channel number. So our channel number in our instruments tab is always going to correspond to the target ID of a work note. So I'm going to click and drag on channel, and I'm going to drag that right on top of target ID. Boom. And just like that, we have our very basic, simple database structure set up. Again, it can get way more complicated than this, especially with relationships, but for the purposes of our thing today, that's all we got to do. So now I'm going to click OK. So now FileMaker has automatically created two different layouts for me that have those fields that I just added in the order that I added them or the order that they were when I clicked OK. So luckily they were in alphabetical order here. We've got assigned to, constants, etc., etc. I'm going to go ahead and close Lightright for a second. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start arranging these fields on this layout in a way that makes a little bit more visual sense to me. And I'm going to start that with my work notes, excuse me, with my work notes layout. So to edit that layout, you can go to View, Layout Mode, or Command L. I'm going to try to use the mouse for everything, but obviously the keyboard shortcuts are a lot faster. So I'm going to Layout Mode, and now you see it kind of looks like a lot of other Mac programs where you have an inspector over here with different options. You can see all the field names in these boxes, etc., etc. I'm going to start moving some of this stuff around in a way that makes a little bit more sense. So, for example, the node ID we're probably always going to want up here at the very top of our record. The target ID we'll probably want up here towards the top as well. There we go. There it is. Target ID. What type it is. And again, you can arrange these any way you want. I'm not making this pretty, I'm just making it functional for today. Status. Priority, who the note is from, the note is to, and then finally our contents. And of course the contents, most of the work notes I give are going to be longer than that. So we're going to make the contents a decent size field here, and then we'll do the same thing with the photo. We'll make it the same size and drop that in. And you'll see as you start to move these things around on your layouts, you get some smart guides, kind of like Adobe programs, where you can align things easily. And there's also under the ruler here, there's all kinds of alignment tools and stuff like that. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag right here above my footer, I'm going to drag this up to make the body a little bit smaller so I just have the information that I need on my screen. Now I'm going to go back to browse mode by going to View, Browse, or Command B. Okay, so now you see if I click in here, I click into these things, it says, wait, there's no records present. We have to create a new record in order to edit text in that record. That's fine. So I'm going to click the New Record button, and you notice right away what happened. Node ID got filled in for me. I got a 1 in there. I could put a target ID, I could put a channel number. I can start filling out all of these individual boxes. Now you might think to yourself, okay, that's going to get pretty tedious during tech. Do I have to come in here every single time, and I need to type work note? Do I need to type to do, etc., etc.? The answer, of course, is no. What we're going to use to fill some of these common fields that we use all the time is a value list. So a value list is basically, it can be a series of text that you specify. It can be a series of text based on other fields and other tables that you specify. It can be all kinds of different things, but it'll allow us to quickly fill data in to a lot of these fields. So to get to there, I'm going to go to File, Manage, Value Lists, and now I'm going to set up a couple of lists. So the most obvious one is going to be my people in my show, right? And I'm going to use custom values for this. So I have lighting designer, associate lighting designer, assistant lighting designer, production electrician, director, stage manager. Okay. Oh, I forgot to name it. We'll call this people. One day when we make this a little more complicated, you'll have a people table, and that the value list will be able to reference the people that are in that table, but not today. So you have people. Let's have work note types. For me, the most common ones are work, focus, plot, programming, and let's say, that's good enough for now. So work, focus, plot, programming. And what else do we need? We need statuses. Normal, high, and low. Now you might say, wait a second, shouldn't high be above normal? The reason I do it this way is because we want normal to be the top of our list. That when we go to click on this list, the things that are at the top are going to be what show up first. So normally, yeah, high, normal, low. But I just want this to be a little bit more readily accessible. To do word note types, people. Okay, that's good for now. So I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to come back to my layout here, and I'm going to go into the layout editor again by going File, Layout Mode. And now I'm going to take some of these fields, for instance, the from. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to click on the to. So I'm selecting both of those fields. And over here in my inspector, under the little data management button, I can choose what style entry box those things are. So right here under control style, right now it's an edit box, which hopefully you're familiar with is basically a box that I can type text into. I'm going to change that instead to be a drop-down list. And now you see it's going to ask me where the values for that drop-down list should come from. So these are both people fields. I'm going to choose people for that. I'm going to include an arrow. So you notice right away a little arrow pops up there to let the user know that they can click to assign click to find a value there. There's a couple of other options here I'm going to show you in a second. For now, I'm going to turn on autocomplete. If I go back to browse mode, you see as I start to click these things, all that stuff that I just added is now there. And with that autocomplete feature turned on, as I start to type, boom, it shows up right there. Just like that. Now let's say you're in the middle of tech and you realize you need to give a note to somebody else. Well, this isn't super helpful if that's the case. You could put a different value in there. I could say spot 1 if I wanted to, but the issue with that is that's only going to show up for that particular work note. If I know that I'm going to be giving spot 1 a lot of notes, I want to go in and edit that value list. Now, of course, in the heat of the moment in tech, again, it's a lot of work to go to manage, value list, et cetera, et cetera. So instead, if I go back to my layout tool or my layout editor here, I can tell this field to also allow editing of that value list. So now it's a one-click operation instead of multiple clicks. So I click the down arrow. Oops, let me delete that. When I click the down arrow, okay, why didn't that work? Oh, because I didn't have them both selected. Now when I click the down arrow, you see there's a button that says edit, and I can very quickly add something to my value list. Again, in order, in the order that I want it to be in. I could also rearrange this value list here. So really quick, powerful tool there. Just like that. Okay, so we'll do the same thing for our type, our status, and our priority boxes. So again, I'm going to go to the layout, oops, not preview. I'm going to go to the layout editor. I'm going to choose type, a drop-down list, and this is going to be types. Now this one I probably don't want to allow any kind of editing of that list. Same thing for status. For the most part, I don't want a whole bunch of random statuses. I want the ones that I'm used to or the ones that we're going to use the most often from show to show. And I will allow autocomplete because some people like to click, some people like to type. That way you're covered for both of them. Actually, I'll show you one quick difference here as well. So with that drop-down list, you have those options to do the editing and stuff like that. You can also do a pop-up menu, and this will allow you, let's do priorities. Oh, did I not do? Oh, I'm dumb. Let me go back to manage value list for a second. I did these backwards. So status, this should actually be priority. And then we should have another one that's work note status. And it can be or we'll call it active, on hold, and completed. Okay, so now priority will be priority, status will be status. And I'll show you the difference in these two things. So with this, you basically have a preset thing that you can't change. With this, you have the options to change things. Keep it as a drop-down list. Of course, there's other things in here too. You can have checkboxes, you can have radio buttons, you can have a calendar, all of these different things that you might find useful. But for our purposes, pretty much the drop-down list is all we really need. And I'm going to go back to browse mode again. And boom, there we go. I've got this set up pretty quickly. One quick little note that I want to give on statuses. So I think it's important to have a completed status and to not just delete the note when you're done with it. And the reason for that is because, as we all know, notes sometimes come up again. And if you delete the note, it's going to be double the amount of work to recreate the note again. If we change the status to completed, we can then come up with some scripts later on that hide our completed notes. And then if we need to, we can go back through and search for a particular node ID. We can search for a particular target ID, and then change that status back again. So I try to not delete any of the notes from my show. I just simply mark them as completed. Okay, so we're going to make this a work note. We'll say it's active and normal priority. Now, again, you might be thinking, okay, well, that's a lot of clicking. We're going to get into adding some buttons and stuff like that later in the week. But one quick thing we can do, because we pretty much always know that when we create a note, it's going to be active and the priority is probably going to be normal. 9 times out of 10, that's probably going to be the case. I can use those auto enter functions that we saw earlier when I was setting up my tables for the first time to automatically fill that information into those fields. So to do that, I'm going to open up my database editor again. It's Command-Shift-D, or File, Manage, Database. Over here under Fields, I'm going to go to my status, double click on it, and under Auto Enter, I want to fill it in with active. And for priority, I want to auto enter normal. Now, I'm not going to click the prohibit modification, anything like that, because I want to be able to change these things after the fact. This is just a way to kind of speed up things during tech for me a little bit. So I click OK. You notice there's no changes have been made here, but when I click new record, look what's happened. I've got 2. Oh, sorry, I don't need to include the quotes there. Forgot about that. But it's created 2, and it's automatically assigned active and normal to that particular note. Get rid of the quotes. I've been learning some programming languages. This was some programming language stuff this week, and so I'm going back and forth has been quite fun. Okay, so now when I click on new, boom, I've got node ID 3, active, normal. Now you notice I only have 2 records, but it's automatically skipped over to the next node ID. Again, this is that idea that we never want to have any kind of a duplicate number. So I see Harrison saying in the chat that he's getting a bit of a delay. Crap. Let me, if other people are having that same delay, comment in the chat. What I'll do is I will cut the stream for a second and restart it at the same link. It won't mess up the video or anything like that, and see if that fixes that delay. Okay, I'll wait to see if anybody else says anything in the chat there. And also, I will fix that delay on the recorded version of this when it comes time. Okay, so we have our work notes. We've got that all arranged the way we want to. Let's go ahead and go and arrange our instrument layout the way we want it to as well. So I'm going to change over here on the layout changer over to instruments. And I'm going to either do Command L or I'm going to go to View, Layout Mode. And I'm going to move these things around a little bit as well. First, I'm just going to kind of move them all off screen out of my way here. Great, looks like no delay. If you do get a delay, just please throw it in the chat. I thought I fixed the problem today, so fingers crossed that it doesn't become a problem. Okay, so channel number is going to be my first thing here. It can be much smaller. And we could do purpose. Oops, I'll do color. And again, not making these pretty for now, just making it functional. Gobo. There are some built-in themes in FileMaker you can choose from as well. Position, unit number would be with position. That stuff, let's say, over here. And then let's start doing our numbers. So first we got channel number, we want our dimmer number. Circuit number. Most of the shows that I do when I'm planning circuits and stuff, just because I think at the scale, I mean, I'm not doing these massive productions, I don't ever really use the circuit name field. I'm actually, well, I guess I'll leave it in here. I just put, you know, like A6, A5, whatever in my circuit number field. I'm sure there's some production electricians watching this who will yell at me for that, but oh well. Later on, we'll talk about how we can combine these two fields automatically. Some stuff like that will be kind of cool. Address. I'm gonna just leave. I'm gonna leave universe and DMX off of here for now. We're gonna get to that in a later lesson. Add our accessory. I guess probably ahead of all those things should probably be instrument type. Put focus information over here. Put these here. The light-right ID we don't really need on our layouts because it's information that's just going to be used in the background to link records together. It's never really going to be anything we want to look at. So I'm just going to delete that from this layout. Deleting it from the layout obviously does not delete the field. The field still exists. It just does not show up anywhere on this particular layout. So I'm going to make my instrument type a little bit smaller. Obviously the load can be way smaller. Put that right there. And I'm just going to put that here for now. So take some time if you're following along. I apologize. I realize I'm probably going kind of fast for some of you who are trying to follow along. It's hard when I don't see you following along. I'm going to go ahead and drag this footer, this margin back up again so that I have just a record that's only the size of what I need it to be there. Okay, got those all laid out. Again, these fields I'm going to leave because I want them in there eventually. I'm going to leave them off to the side for now so I don't see them. I'm going to go back to browse mode by going to view browse or command B. And boom, there we go. Now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to create a new record, and I'm going to give it some information. Channel 1, dimmer 1. And we're going to say this is a 19-degree source 4. Purpose, front cool. Got a new keyboard this week, and I'm still learning how to type on it. Just basically giving it some information here. Top hat. We'll say this is on our number 1 cove. Unit 1, focusing into area A, and focus status not focused. So right away, what can we start looking at as far as things that could be used, or that we could use a value list for? Focus status is probably one right away. Focused, not focused. So I'm going to go ahead and create that value list really quick. Again, value list, focus status, not focused, focused. And I'm going to go back into layout mode, and I'm going to associate that with this field. So again, Command L, I'm going to click on the field, and here under my data manager, I'm going to change this to be a drop-down list, values from focus status, show that little arrow, and autocomplete. Don't want to edit this value list. There's not going to be anything else I want to put there. Go back into browse mode. Now you see I can change it from focused to not focused. Cool thing about having that field is, let's say you have an entire show's worth of instrument records here. You can do conditional formatting, color coding, all that kind of stuff. And obviously later in the week, we're going to get into how to sort your records, how to find particular records, et cetera, so you can quickly have a report of everything in your show that's focused, everything in your show that's not focused, stuff like that. I've got the load 575. And now I'm going to create a couple more of these. So I could do new record, or I'm going to just duplicate the record. So there's no button for that on your toolbar. You can find that under records, duplicate record, or command D. So I'm going to do command D. Oops, command D. And you notice it looks like nothing happened. I'm just in the same field again, but if you look here, it actually created 4 different records for me. It can be kind of confusing when I'm looking at all of them like this. So I'm going to change the view mode that I'm in to be a list view. So right here next to your layouts, you've got 3 buttons. One that is going to be individual record view. Second one is going to be a list view. So there we go. Now we've got all of those records that we just created. And the third one's going to be a table view. This one, or more of a spreadsheet view, I guess. This one can be super useful because you can add fields to your table this way. I only use this a couple of times in any of my solutions just because you don't get a lot of formatting options with the table view like this. Instead, I rather do a list view and make the body really small, and by doing that, you can kind of make your own tables that way. So I'm going to delete this empty one up here. And then I'm just going to change some of this data just so we know that we have different records. Make this one a front warm. Row 4. Unit 2. Unit 3. When you're doing a testing solution like this, what I like to do is make sure that any number you use is the same in every number field. So for example, channel 1, make it all 1s, make it all 2s, 3s. That way when you're starting to lay out your data and work back and forth with that data, you know if you've made a mistake. So if you're seeing like channel 2, but it says dimmer 4, something went wrong somewhere. Okay, and I'm going to make one more. I'm going to make another front warm. We have a nice little double hung system here. This will be channel 4. And I guess this would be into area B. Again, for focus for me, that's just a letter that I assign to the area. Sometimes I use it on some shows, other shows I don't. So you can put anything you want there. Of course, you could also make that a list if you wanted to, or make that a value list if you wanted to. Okay, so now we've got data in both of our tables. We've got 4 instrument records here, and we have our first work note. Now, under target ID here, I can start going ahead and associating this with a channel that's over in my instrument record. So channel 1. Great, but that doesn't really help me at all. I don't see any information, any kind of special information about that show up here. So what I can do is I can because these 2 tables are related to each other through that target ID or channel number key field, I can use that relationship to show data about those channels on this work note display. So a couple of ways I can do that. I can use a portal to do that, but in this particular case, I'm just going to actually drop those fields right onto this layout. So I'm going to go back into the layout view here. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, and I'm going to move this stuff all down just a little bit. Where is my field picker? I lost it. Anyway, okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just take a field that I already have. I'm going to copy paste that field. And I'm going to double click on it to change what I want it to what data I want it to show me. So right now it's just a copy. It's another target ID field. If I click on this drop down here, you see that my instruments table shows up as a related table. So now I could choose, let's say, position. And those 2 little colons there help me to know that it's a related piece of data and it's not something that's on the current table. Current table is shown right here. Currently, I'm working in my work notes table. So this is position. Now, when I go back to browse mode, you see that thing is filled in right there. Now, I don't necessarily want anybody to be able to change this in any way. I don't want somebody to accidentally be able to change this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and under my data manager here under layout view, I'm going to turn off field entry under browse mode. I don't want to be able to type anything into that field. So I'm going to uncheck that box and boom, now it's there. I can't click on it, can't do anything with it. If I change this target ID to be, I guess they're all on the first cove, so that wouldn't do anything. Let's go ahead and add a couple more of our fields into place here. So a quick little shortcut, you can copy paste, or on a Mac, you can hold down Option, and then when you drag, of course, it will automatically create a copy of that for you. Unit number. Boom. And just double check. Boom, unit 1. If I change my target ID to 4, look at that right away. It's referencing that data back from my instrument records. So you can see how powerful this gets very quickly. I don't have to, now when I'm looking at a thing, let's say I'm an associate or an assistant and the production electricians come up to me for the work notes for the day. I can say, all right, here's the note, and automatically right in front of me, see that referenced information that I need to see about that particular instrument. Other things that might be useful, we'll throw a couple more things on here real quick. The advantage of doing this copy paste thing is that it's also copy pasting the non-editable field attributes that we assigned earlier. So I like to create a field the way I like it with all the attributes, and then come in and then just copy paste it and change it again. So we don't need channel because obviously the channel is already there as a target. So we'll do circuit, not circuit name, do circuit number. Do a couple of other ones here. Circuit, let's do dimmer. Actually, I'll probably do dimmer first. That would make more sense. Boom. There. So now again, as we change this target ID, you can see all that referenced information is showing up there on the note. So obviously super helpful when you're looking at it on the screen, becomes even more valuable when we get to the lessons later on the week that have to do with creating PDFs and emailing these notes out. So now a production electrician could get a PDF with a work note and have everything they need to know about that instrument right there associated with that work note. Pretty cool. Okay, so the other thing I want to look at real quick, typing in a target ID here is great. I definitely want to be able to do that if I know what channel I'm working with. But this would also be super helpful if I could click on a drop down here and see a list of my potential channels that I have in my show. Might not be super helpful if I've got 600 instruments in my show, but if I've got a small show with 50, 60 lights, I could make do with a value list there. So to do that, I'm going to come into Manage Value Lists again, and I'm going to create a new value list. But this time, I'm not going to just type in data here under this custom fields thing. I want to name this target. Let's call it work note targets. And I'm going to use values from a field. So I'm going to use values from my instrument field. It's going to be channel. Click OK. Click OK. I'm sure that one more time. Sorry, I know I'm going fast. So I'm going to choose instruments. And I'm going to say show me values from the channel field. You can resort if you wanted to. You can do all that kind of stuff. But for this purpose, it's simple enough just to click channel. Click OK. Click OK. Click OK. And now, what do you think I'm going to do? Of course, I'm going to go in. I'm going to edit my target ID field to be a drop-down list. And I'm going to make it work note targets. Now, important thing to notice here. These two options that we had before about allowing editing and auto-completing, those are now gone. And the reason for that is because I don't have it set up where I can create other records and other tables, and I don't necessarily know that I would want to in this particular case. Again, for this particular work note database, I don't want to be able to associate a work note with anything that's not a current channel number. I obviously know there are reasons why we might want to, but we're going to get to those another day. So now, boom. I've got a list of channel numbers here. Yeah, that's pretty cool, but that's not really super informative to me. What if I don't necessarily know what channel 3 is doing? Well, what I can do is I can re-edit that value list again. Work note targets. FileMaker gives me this really cool option to display values from a second field. So this is very helpful when your first field is a number and then you want some kind of text in your second field. So for that, I'm going to make the second field purpose. And then I'm going to sort values based on the first field. Boom. Clicking OK again. And now when I click on this drop down, it's giving me a channel number and then the purpose next to it. So it helps me get a little bit more specific about what I want. Now, worth noting is that when I click in this box, it's only committing that number to this record. It's not actually doing anything with this other data except for showing it to me. So it's purely just a way to help you clearly see what's going on with your numbers. A good example of this is when in my FileMaker I have a scene database. And so for scenes and songs, there's numbers associated with them, but when I'm going through a list and I'm editing it in the room, I don't necessarily know what every single number is, but I might know what the scene title is. So FileMaker needs the number in order to be able to reference other things, but I want to be able to see that scene, and so I'm able to do that in my value list in order to show both of those things, which is super, super handy. So cool. So this, again, if we think about how our database is set up, we're talking about a one-to-many relationship. So again, a channel can be associated with multiple work notes, but a work note can only have one channel associated with it. So that's what's allowing us to do this right here, allowing us to add these fields in no particularly special way to reference that data back and forth. So let's go to a list view of our work notes here. I'm going to delete this old note. And I've got this note. I'm going to just give it some information. It's a work note from lighting designer to programmer, note contents, and I'm going to duplicate that just so I have two of them. Now what I'm going to do though is I'm going to do two separate notes about the same instrument. So these are both going to be about channel 1. Need to refocus. Great. I'm going to come back here to my instruments table, and I'm going to go ahead and add some of those related fields. Just like we established, should be able to work just fine, right? So we're going to make a little, I'm going to add some text here. And I'm going to say associated work notes. Copy paste a field in. Going to go to my work, sorry, let me back up. I copy pasted this field down. I'm going to double click on the field. I'm going to change the field contents over to work notes and note ID. Going to copy paste that, and I'm going to say status. Get the idea right. I'm just going to add these all in. Status from. Not going to do all of them. Just going to do a few of them. And assign to, and make them all a little bit bigger so I can see. Great. So now if we come up here to channel 1, we see, oh cool, it's got an associated work note. But wait a second. This doesn't work because if we go back to our work notes database, we see that we have 2 records associated with that same thing. FileMaker only, when we do it this way, only knows to show us that very first, however we have it sorted, have that very first associated work note. So right away, we might think that this work note is done, but it's really not. You know, if I were to go in and delete that work note, then the other one would show, or excuse me, if I were to go in and delete that other one, then the remaining one would show up there. So instead of doing it this way on our instruments record, we're going to use something called a portal to show us as many associated work notes as we need to see about that particular channel. So I'm going to go back into layout mode. I'm just going to delete these fields that I just added. There's a couple ways I can do this. There is a box here for it, a little button, or you can go to Insert Portal. I like doing the button because the button allows you to drag out the space before you make it. Okay, so now it's going to ask you a couple of things. It's saying, all right, we've made this portal, and we want to what do we want to show in the portal? We want to show records from work notes, and we want to allow vertical scrolling of those things. And let's say allow up to 4 records to be shown. Click OK. Boom. You notice right away it kind of came into our footer, so I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Now, when I go back into browse mode, oops, sorry, I forgot one important step. I forgot to add fields. I'm going to add fields to this box. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to copy paste, note ID. Now, important thing to note about this portal formatting wise, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see this a little bit better. You see that you've got a gray bar here and then a white bar. The white bar represents a single record, and then the gray bar is going to be just kind of, it takes up the visual space of what multiple records will be when you add them. So again, I specified that there could be up to 4, there could be up to 4 individual work notes associated with each thing. It's going to show me up to those 4 things here. I could do way more than that if I wanted to. So note ID. We have, we'll just do our contents just for simplicity's sake. Now when I go back to browse mode, Boom, there we go. Channel 1 has 2 associated work notes with it. So again, portals are super useful, but you really, in a one-to-many relationship like what we're working with right now, you really only need the portal on that one side. You don't need it on the many side. The work notes, because they can only be associated with one channel in our current database, don't need that portal. In a future lesson, we'll get into that a little bit deeper. Boom. So now if I were to come in here and I were to add just duplicate this work note, add a 5 just so we see the difference, and I come back over here to my instruments, there we go. Now that third work note shows up here, which is pretty cool. So in tomorrow's lesson, we're going to talk about adding buttons and some scripts and stuff like that. We can actually use this portal to create work notes in our other table. We can do all kinds of cool stuff like that. Cool. What else do I have on the list for today? We talked about that. We talked about that. Channels. Great. So that's actually all I have on my list for today. We did a pretty decent job filling that time. What I would, if you have been following along with your own copy of FileMaker, what I'll ask you to do before tomorrow is just spend a little bit of time cleaning up your layouts a little. Oh, no, that's one thing I need to show you. But spend a little time cleaning up your layouts a little bit. Make them kind of in a visual way that makes sense for you. I'll do the same thing. This obviously is not super pretty or super useful right now, but it's enough to kind of demonstrate what's going on. One more thing I'll show you before we jump into some questions is how to delineate these different records. Because you see, like right now, this is just a big gray blob, and it's really hard unless I've clicked on the individual record to know what I'm working with. So to do that, I'm going to come back into my layout editor, Command L, and I'm going to click over here on this body button. When I do that, over here under my styling tools, you see that I can choose 3 different things: primary, alternate, and active. So an alternate is going to be ones that are not currently selected. And I'm just going to change that fill color to be kind of slightly off gray. And let's say the active one, I want to make a yellow highlight. That's pretty obnoxious. Let's go more of an orange highlight. Boom. So now, again, with body selected, I've chosen my primary one is white, so that's just a regular row. Alternating rows will be gray, and the active row I'm working in will have the highlight. So now when I go back into my manager here, you see as I click, that yellow comes into play. And if I add a couple of more records, you can see that now they're striped like that. So right away, you get the idea of how I could use this to form my own table view and not use that table view, because it's going to give me a lot more options for layout, or for styling. So again, I'm going to come in here to work instruments. I'm going to do the same thing. Command L, choose my body, primary white, alternate, we'll do a gray, active, we'll do an orange again. Boom. So super useful like that. So spend some time over the next 24 hours before our next session playing around with resizing these a bit. In the inspector here, you'll see all kinds of tools for aligning things, for formatting things, for assigning themes to things. So right now, of course, I'm just using the default theme that FileMaker gives me. There's a bunch of different themes you can choose from. I find that when you're first starting out, it's easier just to have simple black and white, easy to read stuff like that. Let's see, anything else on my list for today? I don't think so. I think that's it for my list for today. So if anybody has any questions, I'm going to hang out for another 10 minutes or so. Feel free to throw them into the chat. Otherwise, I hope to see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to be getting into adding some buttons, starting to do a little bit of script work, starting to be able to manipulate this data a little bit more. We'll also be doing our first light-write import. So all that stuff will be happening tomorrow evening. Thanks, everybody.